I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information, new information, as fast as it became available. They wanted it as rapidly as it became available on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
But the CIA would be beaten to the punch on developing the magic mushrooms by Sandoz Laboratories. From the mushrooms, they derived psilocybin.
By the time I was in a position to do anything, Dr. Albert Hoffmann in Switzerland had isolated the principle, identified it, and synthesized it. Remarkably an excellent achievement.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you... I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
any of these substances would
have been given to
unwitting persons?
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I
think that was probably one of the things they had in mind.
I mean, testing it out on an American citizen.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
A decision was made at the highest levels of the CIA to do testing on unwitting Americans. As one CIA document says, such testing would be operationally realistic, because testing, given with advance warning, was pro forma at best and resulted in a false sense of accomplishment. A former CIA official who worked on these programs describes for the first time how the decision was made.
I think every last one of us felt sorry to attempt this kind of thing. We knew we were crossing the line. Every decent kid knows he shouldn't steal, but he does it sometimes. We knew damn well we didn't want anyone else to know what we were doing.
The decision was made to do testing on unwitting victims. Who would they be? It was decided they should be on the fringes of society because they were most vulnerable.
It was the borderline underworld. Prostitutes, drug addicts, and other small-timers would be powerless to seek any kind of revenge in case they found out.
And as their predecessors did a decade earlier, the CIA would turn to George White for help. White was now a high-ranking narcotics official. And by this time, the stories about George White were legendary.
One day I was over to see George at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
Leo Jones, a friend of White's who installed bugging equipment for him.
And there was George standing in front of a full-length mirror with a Derringer that he always carried as a second gun, which he had loaded with wax slugs and was sitting there shooting at him's reflection in the mirror, having a general ball for himself.
Heavy drinker. He loved to drink. Mike started out with martinis. He used to start out with martinis. By supper time, he changed to straight whiskey. Then later on, he graduated to Gibson's. I think he consumed at least half to three-quarters of a gallon of Gibson's a day.
That's a good drinker.
That's a good drinker.
He could hold his liquor. Very well, very well. The only thing you would ever tell about George if he was drinking, that his speech became slightly slurred when he drank more than a quart.
By the time the waiter came over, he was really soused. So the waiter says, "I help you, monsieur?" And George White was busy talking with me. Paid no attention to the waiter, so the waiter tapped him on the shoulder and said, "May I help you, monsieur?" George White turned around, whipped his gun out, and stuck it in the guy's face like this in this crowded restaurant. I could have snuck under the table. I was so embarrassed by it.
George White did not mind bending the law, and he knew the street well. He was the ideal choice for what the CIA had in mind.
We were Ivy League, white, middle class. We were naive, totally naive about this, and he felt pretty expert. He knew the whores, the pimps, the people who brought in the drugs.
White set up so-called safe houses for the CIA in New York, here in Greenwich Village, and later in San Francisco, in this hotel, and in an apartment atop Telegraph Hill with a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. A former CIA official who worked in the safe houses reveals that they were used not only for drug testing, but to study sexual behavior and how it could be used to manipulate people.
We did quite a study of prostitutes and their behavior. How do you take a woman who is willing to use her body to get money out of a guy to get him to talk about things which are much more important, like state secrets? To find a prostitute who's willing to stay is a hell of a shock. It's a boost to his ego. Most of the time, he gets pretty vulnerable. What the hell is he going to talk about? Not the sex. So he starts talking about his business. It's at that time she can lead him gently. But you have to train prostitutes to do that. We learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom. It wasn't what we had just thought of, you know, the missionary position. We started to pick up knowledge that could be used in operations.
There would be victims in all of this, but as the agency knew, they couldn't fight back. Some entries from George White's diaries. Clarice gets horrors. Janet, sky high. A former CIA official describes how he slipped LSD to a B-girl in a San Francisco bar as recreated here.
I took an ordinary book of matches and a plastic vial that contained the dose. You leaned over her drink with a match. At the moment you struck it, you squeezed the pack. That squirted a liquid. And the sound of the match striking hid the sound of the liquid hitting her drink. It did get to her. It did affect her. She talked about being a little bit nervous. She said she didn't know what the matter was with her. It didn't knock her out. If it did later, I didn't know.
Even if it had, there would have been no way of getting her medical help, for it had to be kept secret. During all of these tests, there was rarely, if ever, medical supervision. As one agency memo says, we have no answer to the moral question. Still another agency source says, if we were scared enough of a drug not to try it on ourselves, we sent it to San Francisco for testing. The safe houses were not the only testing grounds. Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country. And word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
It seems to me that it was a sort of elitist drug.
Dr. Sidney Cohen, one of the country's foremost authorities on LSD.
Then, of course, the thing broadened enormously when Tim Leary and the Harvard group spoke so glowingly about the drug.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
The counter case that I would make in relation